Well, let me begin then without much ado. Um, I want to skip to the part where I wanted to paint a picture for you. Imagine that you are the president of a country and you have written an open letter in support of a candidate, encouraging your voters to vote for them in an upcoming election. A journalist then critiques your letter and the candidate you support on Twitter. What do you do? Do you engage in discourse? Do you think, reevaluate? Do you support healthy public discourse? Or do you send a takedown notice to Twitter to have that journalist's criticism taken down on the basis that the reproduction of the public letter with the logo of the political party comprised copyright violation? In 2014, the then president of Ecuador did just that. What you see on hopefully the right of your screen is a counter notice sent by a journalist who said that they did not infringe anyone's copyright, and that their tweet criticizing a political opponent was only taken down as a matter of censorship. This way of using notice and takedown for censorship is becoming prevalent, and many other powerful individuals, businesses, and public institutions continue to increasingly abuse notice and takedown in this way. We will spend time today talking about the Lumen Project and how it becomes an aggregator of notice and takedown requests being sent to third-party online service providers. The Lumen Project was founded in 2002 by Wendy Seltzer at the Berkman Klein Center. It is an independent, one-of-a-kind research project that studies takedown notices concerning online content. We collect and analyze requests to remove material from the web. The Lumen Project runs a database, which is a repository of content removal requests that online service providers receive and are willing to share with the database. It is then selectively granted to researchers, journalists, and scholars to study patterns in online content takedown. We receive about 5,000 to 7,000 notices every day, which, to be clear, is not even the fraction of the notices being sent to internet providers. This is just the amount that they're willing to share with us. About 40,000 notices per week. And as of summer of 2019, there were over 4 billion URLs in the Lumen database. Some of the Lumen's notice submitters include Google, Twitter, YouTube, Medium, GitHub, and others that have committed to share notices with Lumen. This is a list of online service providers we are always looking to grow. I want to begin by giving you an example of a government takedown request and an example of a notice. What you see in front of you with the blue header is an example. I can see that someone has their hands raised. I'd love to pause for questions at any point. I can't hear you though.
Can you hear me now?
Hi.
So whenever you refer to something you're sharing on the screen, we're actually not seeing it.
Oh, so you cannot see a PowerPoint presentation?
We can see you and we can see the table with ourselves. We can't see anything you're sharing.
I suggest if you can click on share screen, there's this option.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's on the bottom, the bottom right side,
Yeah.
right? You have to click, I guess, on it in order to share your screen.
Okay, interesting. Well, thanks so much for flagging that. That would have been a bummer if you couldn't see the screen the whole time. Let me try to figure this out in a second. Okay, well, so this is an example of a government takedown request sent by the Russian telecom ministry, the Roskomnadzor, to Google. What you see, hopefully now with the blue header, is what a takedown notice looks like. And in the explanation of this request, they say that a Russian citizen was trying to view content that the Russian government labeled as illegal, which had to do with news. So this is an example of what a notice looks like. I want to discuss today a technique that I found in my research that is being used for fraudulent content removal and has led to one Russian and American mafia agency sending 33,000 takedown notices to remove legitimate news article. It's called the backdated article technique to fraudulently remove legitimate content. With this technique, a wrongful notice sender or the copier sends a copy of a true article and backdates it, creating a fake copy of the same article that at first glance appears to have been published prior to the true original. Then, based on the claim that this backdated article is the original, the copier then sends a DMCA to the online service provider, alleging that the original is in fact the copied or infringing article, requesting the takedown of the true original. The wrongful notice sender then removes the fake original URL after sending the copyright takedown request to Google or another platform. This is likely in order to ensure that the article does not stay online in any form any longer. If the takedown notice is successful, this means that the disappearance from internet of information that is most likely to be legitimate speech. Let me give you an example of this. This is a notice in Lumen shared by Google. It says that the allegedly original URL is that of todaynews.press and allegedly infringing URL is server media. I conducted Google searches of both these URLs, allegedly original and allegedly infringing. They were both not indexed in Google. The original was no longer available on the internet at all. Now, I went into the Wayback Machine, which is where you can look up URLs and see what those pages looked like in the past. And this is what I found. What was labeled as the allegedly infringing URL looked to be an authentic domain name, and a glance at both screenshots leads to a strong assumption that the allegedly infringing URL is more sophisticated, whereas the original, allegedly, is a shoddy attempt at copying it. This is also confirmed by the fact that the domain of the allegedly original URL no longer exists. So todaynews.press no longer exists, whereas server media turned out to be an authentic news platform. This is an example of how the backdated article technique was used to remove legitimate content from the internet. To encapsulate what I just said, the original URL is copied, backdated, claimed to be the actual original, and is used as the basis of sending a takedown requests. Once this takedown request is successful and the true original, allegedly copied URL is taken down, the creator of the fake URL removes the fake one as well. What this means is that that news article or review ceases to exist on the internet. This is my current research that I'm doing using the Lumen database. There is a strong likelihood that this set of 33,000 notices that I have found are an organized attempt to abuse DMCA notice and takedown in order to have legitimate news articles about political people, bureaucrats, human traffickers, financial fraudsters against US, Russian, and Kazakhstani bureaucrats are being taken down. These notices have been sent from 16 jurisdictions. 60% of them are from USA and 28% from Ukraine and Russia. The material located in the URLs in question all collectively reveal the relatedness and relationships between a powerful group of individuals and the way that such power is abused. It seems very plausible that this method for sending wrongful takedowns could be a standardized business model relying on abuse of notice and takedown notices to remove legitimate content. Peter Guest from an organization called Rest of World studied the reputation laundering firms that take on such powerful individuals as their clients and abuse DMCA and notice and takedown to manage their reputations. He found that clients were willing to pay amounts of up to $30,000 per news article to target articles and pages that are critical of them. With this example of my current case study that I'm doing about wrongful takedown, I want to pause for questions to see if there are any questions on this scheme of takedown or on whatever else I've said so far. Fantastic. With this, I'll move on to some other examples of research in the Lumen database. Professor Volok a professor at the University of California, identified a falsified court order and seeking to delve deeper into the scope and depth of that fraud connected with the Lumen Project. Professor Warlock was able to access thousands of relevant court orders that had been submitted to Google and other internet search companies. This means that there was someone, or possibly a reputation laundering firm, that was taking on clients, and in order to make sure that their reputation or their business's reputation was managed, was creating fake court orders that they were then sending to platforms such as Google to have critical business reviews, critical personal reputation reviews being taken off the internet. Professor Volok found that over a 4-year period, close to 200 out of 700 court orders submitted to Google were what he characterized as either obviously forged or fraudulent, or at least highly suspicious cases, including at least 80 outright forgeries. An investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, Andrea Fuller, also used the database to uncover a story about how false copyright complaints tricked Google into removing authentic news articles about wrongdoing by convicted criminals, foreign officials, and business people. In a sense, in this case, organizations or individuals who did not want certain results to display on Google's search engine copy-pasted that article on a different platform and dated it prior to the date of the original article. The findings of Wall Street Journal, similar to mine, prompted Google to conduct a review during which it found more than 100 new abusive submitters. As a result, Google restored more than 52,000 links that it determined to be improperly removed due to wrongful takedown requests. Lumen at the moment does not receive takedown requests from many platforms and only receives them from a few. It is hard to imagine the extent of information that is not available to researchers, journalists, and other stakeholders only because of lack of takedown transparency. As I will discuss in my next slide, mandatory takedown disclosures will improve research dramatically. Since we're a small group of people, I just want to flag that I'm happy to pause for questions at any point. You could just pick up the microphone and ask. And then, of course, I'll pause at the end of a few slides every few minutes. What you see, hopefully on your screen as a graph, is the average number of government takedown requests that are seen in Lumen per month. The number of takedown requests has increased dramatically over the last few years. Mandatory takedown disclosures will improve research dramatically because we don't yet have access to great data. Not-for-profit initiatives have been working for almost 2 decades to maintain a database of content removal requests that online platforms receive. This data is then provided to researchers who have used it in the past to identify problematic trends in content moderations. While over 20 platforms now share takedown notices with Lumen on topics including copyright, counterfeit products, government requests, court orders, and others, researchers that work with the database are always eager for more data regarding notices, including the jurisdiction from which a notice originated and whether any action was taken to remove or moderate it. However, internal voluntary transparency initiatives are likely designed to further business incentives. For example, if a platform like Facebook was to internally talk about how many takedown notices it received, it's easier to maneuver a number that is convincing to them and helps incentivize their business incentives. Whereas if a third-party aggregator became the one taking all of Facebook's takedown requests, putting them together and comparing it with that of Instagram, Google, YouTube, Twitter, and others, it would make for a better statistic on exactly what the internet landscape of content removal was looking like. And this sort of problem makes external transparency through legislative mandates or best practices necessary. The database, such as Lumen, is only able to aggregate the notices that online platforms choose to share, and therefore, the data is only as good as those platforms' transparency imperatives. Despite the abundance of data, this remains one of the database's insurmountable inadequacies, one that creating legal transparency mandates would certainly remedy. Hence, creating legal mandates and due processes that require very large online service providers to share data with vetted researchers may be a great next step to ensure continued research efforts. I have a question for the audience about how such transparency mandates from the West engage with the global majority. Do we believe that takedown transparency mandates created in the West by platforms that mainly operate out of the West, such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and others, translate into the needs of the global majority, which is the rest of the world? Um, do folks have thoughts on that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
All right, great. I don't have a direct answer to your question, but what I can say is that, especially in this part of the world, we're often dependent on foreign legislation
Mhm.
and assume, or at least depend on uh, companies not wanting to do exceptions for different areas and so on. So, for example, here we're kind of dependent on GDPR, even though it's European law,
Mhm.
but many companies, especially the big social media platforms, decided to follow it worldwide.
Mhm.
When it comes to takedown requests, I know they happen a lot in the UAE.
Mhm.
I don't know to what extent transparency has helped. I mean, when you mentioned in the beginning that Google is one of the companies that share takedown requests, but they don't share, and the entire set, this is the first time I learned that they're only sharing a subset.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. Mhm. Sorry, go on.
I don't know anybody who has done research on this locally, which is one of the reasons I'm here.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. I have two comments. One, that this is exactly why we thought that Bread&Net is a good forum to introduce a repository such as this. We know that Lumen does have requests sent to Google from the UAE region. We don't yet have enough researchers interested to study what exists there. The same thing happened with Turkey, where a couple of years ago we had researchers show interest in understanding what the Turkish government wants removed. And this led to, since then, annual reports of the kind of content that the government and other enforcement agencies in Turkey are having removed. As someone that comes from Indian origin but works in the United States, I also feel there's a disparity in the kind of information and resources being put to legislate the West, not recognizing that that is what translates into the laws that legislate the rest of the world. An example of this is the NetzDG, which in Germany required that content be removed, patently illegal content be removed within 24 hours, with no mandates on the transparency regarding those content removal. What that then led to is that most parts in the global majority released similar laws without requirements for any sort of transparency on any wrongful content that had been removed. And that is exactly one of the reasons why more research and more data collection on the content removal requests sent to online platforms is important. Thank you so much for your comment. I want to pause for any more comments before I move on to an initiative that Lumen took that we'd love to brainstorm on.
Is it working now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay, hi, thank you. Sort of related to this, what I see in various parts of the world is not official takedown requests, but using an army of a group of bot accounts, say, that all report, say, a Facebook page of a journalist as offensive in some way, and then Facebook moderators getting so many requests, they end up taking the page down. So that's something that I think related to your work. I'm curious if that's part of your quote unquote mandate, if that's something you look into as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Bot takedown requests is certainly something that I'm looking into as part of enforcement reformation. one way of doing this, in my mind, which I'm curious to hear your and everyone else's thought on, is say a dual channel of takedown. Do you know how there's a fast lane and a slow lane on the road? Similarly, when there are multiple or more than a certain number of takedown requests being sent from the same sender, and even one or two of them have been flagged to be inauthentic takedown requests, I'm proposing that they be moved into a slow lane and more checkpoints be added before that content then be taken down. Because as I illustrated in one of my previous examples, there has been 33,000 requests sent, all having to do with one mafia person, and allegations of human trafficking and other such allegations. And if there were to be such a slow moving traffic, we would then notice that it seems that there is a unit of 3 or 4 senders sending all of these notices. And many of these 33,000 news articles would still remain on the internet if such a slow moving lane was introduced. Do you think that that answers your question? Do you have any more thoughts on that?
I think that answers my question. It wasn't yeah, I'm not how much it was a question anyway, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, fantastic. In that spirit, I also want to introduce folks in the room to an initiative called the Takedown and Transparency Research Sprint that the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Law and the Lumen Project took up together uh, in order to investigate potential improvements that we can make to inform transparency regarding takedown of online content. As we evidence so far, that there's a lack of standardization of transparency regarding takedown requests, which leads not only to opacity regarding takedown generally, but also to difficulty in understanding the ways that takedown processes broadly may be misused by individuals, organizations, and powerful institutions. Hence, the focus of this research sprint was the creation of best practices for takedown transparency. The statement of best practices output was envisioned to be a first step in the process of creating best practices for transparency concerning content takedown requests. I want to move to the next slide, and I request as many of you as are interested to answer my question. This is a system mapping that we did as a starting point for understanding best practices. We wanted to understand the first point of contact that stakeholders for takedown transparency were interested in. And I would love to go around the room and hear folks and who they are as stakeholders, if they're representatives of online service providers, government agents, users of the internet, researchers of the internet, or civil society and advocacy group, and discuss how takedown transparency comes to them as a key priority in their work. Do you think someone at some point in the room can start? We can just start by you telling me what type of stakeholder you are. That could be an OSP, a government agent, a user of the internet, which I believe most of us must be, since this is happening over video call, and researchers or civil society activists.
Let's say, would you kindly repeat your question again?
Yes, I can actually put my question in the chat for folks to. Okay, well, let me also read my question out. I asked folks, looking at the presentation, we did a system mapping of how researchers, governments, and end users of the internet would be affected by takedown transparency. So my questions to the folks were to tell me about their background, which one of these three they think they best fit into. Okay, well,
All right. So civil society, and I would identify civil society. And honestly, this is just a personal curiosity for me. It has nothing to do with my work.
Mhm.
Um, so the yeah, the two countries you mentioned, in addition to Saudi Arabia. I'm just interested in learning more about how they're using and abusing this process to enforce what I guess can fairly be called censorship.
Yeah, I think that would be
My
fair
only
to.
experience with Lumen Database is when I'm researching somebody, and at the bottom of Google, the Google results sheet, I see there are more results that are not shown to you. Click to see Lumen Database. That's it. And it has the URL, so I know to go and search there. So
Yes.
yeah, and I know that when you listed the companies, you didn't list Bing. So do they not share?
Bing also shares takedown requests, but however, unfortunately, they receive much fewer requests than other platforms, such as maybe say Facebook or others that do not yet share requests with us. Okay, well, is there anyone else who would like to answer that question? Why takedown transparency matters to them in their work?
Yeah, hello. I'm Hadi. I actually work for Google, so I consider myself as maybe part of the OSPs. I'm on a policy team, and I think I guess I'm not going to say my personal perspective on this is that one, companies do definitely care about takedown transparency. I think it's an evolving field, right? Like I think 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there wasn't a need for anything to do with takedown transparency. But now it's becoming more of a relevant issue. And I think the more that we're hearing that it does care, the more that it can inspire, push the company to, if we're not being transparent enough, to be even more transparent. I think if you look at how these companies there was no voluntary transparency initiatives, and I think the identification that it is important resulted in some of the efforts you're seeing. And I think it's not going to be, this is the most, right? I think there will be more, but I think a big kind of challenge to that is also the balancing the privacy with transparency, right? Because all of these requests or anything to do with a content takedown, of course, it's you want to be transparent about, let's say a government request, because it might be, could be viewed as censorship. But what do you do when it's about, a minor, a takedown request pertaining to a 16-year-old? Do you want to be voluntarily publishing that data online? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't then create a privacy issue, right? So I think those are some of the thorny issues, right? Obviously, the goal to be more transparent does exist, but balancing that, ever-changing privacy regulations and other sort of regulations, GDPR, you have in the DSA now in Europe. I think that's part of the challenge. And I think looking for, researchers like yourselves to contribute to that discussion, I think helps push the whole, baton forward, so to say. So that's my 2 cents. Happy to hear anyone else's thoughts. Yeah.
Well, I quickly
want to respond or
yes. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. In fact, as part of this research sprint that led to the system mapping, we had someone from Google, actually Lumen's liaison with Google, share their work in how Google was the torchbearer in transparency. I know that Google was the first platform to come out with the transparency report in 2011 or 12. And the DSA, it's interesting that you mentioned the GDPR and so do many others, because GDPR creates sort of this privacy-heavy legislation that is not then offset by a transparency-heavy legislation, which would make sure that we create a balance. With the DSA though, articles like 13 and 31 that request platforms such as Google and others to share content removal requests and many other such obligations sort of helps balance out that tension created through privacy. Lumen is actually helping the EU create, the European Commission create that database that stems out of the DSA article 13 and 31. I agree with what you said vehemently, actually, about how different takedown requests bring in different interests. Like a government takedown request would require a lot more transparency. For example, it was through Google's transparency with Lumen that journalists world over were able to find out that the European Commission is sending notices to Ukraine and other European countries and other platforms to remove Sputnik and other such Russian news platforms during the Ukraine-Russia war. And so I agree that the importance of notices vary based on notice type. Something that we're very seriously studying is non-consensual imagery that is shared, and how we can better research that. While anonymity there is very important, there's also importance in understanding better the needs and motivations behind such notices being sent. A solution, a hopeful solution that Lumen is coming up with is a horizontal tiered level access to content. And whereas everyone, all journalists would be able to see government requests sent for content relating to minors or non-consensual imagery or even terrorist extremist content, is only shared with a very specific 1 to 2% researchers only after taking consent from those platforms. So that's a way we're going forward. Of course, this is always a steep learning curve, and as people and platforms learn more about transparency, so will Lumen. But thank you so much for that great comment. Is there anyone else in the room that has thoughts on takedown transparency in their line of work?
Hi. I work for Internews, which is an international NGO, but I work with groups in the global south or groups around the world who deal with digital threats. And what I've learned in my work, and that's why I like your work and your project, is like when we think about digital threats, we think of like advanced malware, like Pegasus and things like that. But I think for many journalists, this is the real threat, the one thing that you're talking about. They're adversaries. They don't have the power, the financial means often to use something like Pegasus, but they do have the means to use either fake DMCA request or, as I mentioned earlier, like using bots of individual accounts reporting a journalist account. And I just want to say that's why I think your work is important, and I want to see it embedded in our minds as part of digital threats. Like this is a real digital threat against journalists, which for many might actually be more relevant than advanced spyware.
Yeah. That's a great comment. I agree that sometimes when we look into the technological advancement, we can mistake that for the only way that the internet is being subjected to chilling effect. Something as simple as a 1998 legislation, which is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the United States, and introduced the notice and takedown system, which now the rest of the world uses for content removal requests, has now become one of the ways that censorship is being carried out on the internet. This is one of the reasons why we're always very keen on having more geographical representation within the database. We're always curious that local platforms within countries also share with an aggregator such as Lumen, because that then shows us the extent of takedown requests being sent, not just through the Western lens of Western platforms, but also through local geographical lenses of different countries. In a bid for this, we actually tried to bring on the Indian platform Koo, which was a Twitter alternative. And while that is still stuck with contract in a contract phase, we're always keen to have more notice sharers and more researchers researching within the Lumen database. And so thank you so much for your comment.
I'll definitely reach out afterwards with some thoughts. Okay, thank you.
I look forward to it. With this, I've come on to my final slide, where I talk about mandating meaningful transparency. Several scholars that have studied takedown notices have expressed frustration that takedown notices are not a matter of public record in some capacity. And mandating meaningful transparency regarding takedowns will help gather better data and inform better policies. While the Lumen database attempts to fill some gaps in this knowledge by archiving takedown notices and also balancing tensions of user safety by redacting personal information and maintaining exclusive access, even so, platforms currently share with Lumen voluntarily. This means that a certain platform can decide that they will only share a certain type of requests with Lumen and not others. Which is why, as we were discussing in the room just now, laws such as the Digital Services Act are a strong step forward in mandating platform transparency regarding takedown by requiring that they share takedown information with third parties. It's also important to flag the need to rethink notice and stay down, which is being proposed as a solution in many laws for intermediary liability. which recommend that notice and stay down model, such as one adopted in Germany, where content is removed and required to stay down and never, with possibility of never having it back on the internet, where a service provider must take action to ensure takedown of allegedly infringing material and also ensure that it stays down and is not put back. There is much more vast scope of abuse in notice and stay down model than there even was in the notice and take down model, where there is possibility at least of putback. There is little scope of course correction in notice and stay down because the possibility of putback is removed from the equation. Hence, there may be strong reasons to advocate against the notice and stay down model in favor of the notice and take down model. Finally, Lumen is always interested in working with new researchers who are interested in learning more about the over 15 million notices available in the website. If you think you might be one of them and would like to know more about researching with Lumen, I'm very keen to hear from any and as many of you at the end of the presentation and here forward. With the last 5 or so minutes remaining, I wanted to open for questions or final thoughts and comments.
I have a question maybe to you. In an ideal world, what would takedown transparency look like from your perspective for these sort of big platforms?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. I would, in an ideal world, I would ideally say that one could consider being transparent based on notice category. In my research, as we recently discussed, I found that while there are some categories where notices, for example, government takedown requests, the more transparency, the better. But there are other types of notices where the less transparency, the better. For example, terrorist extremist content. And so I would say that transparency in an ideal world would be dictated based on the notice type. And however, I would also say that all types of notices, there would be some level of transparency. It would not be a black and white. It would operate in the gray. But I would imagine that notice category would be a good starting point for how transparency can be considered. Having said that, I shared the system mapping where the other trade-offs to be considered, including user trust, accountability, data privacy, user protections, and others were important. And balancing these tensions is, I wish I could answer that question alone. I would be a very expensive lawyer if I could. But unfortunately, this is something I hope that communities and groups can come together to practice. In a bid to do this, the Lumen Project has come up with a draft statement of best practices for takedown transparency that I would be very happy to share with folks. And that is a working document that we're hoping to take inputs from as many people as interested, and continue the work on the best practices for takedown transparency. I'm posting a link to the work so far in the chat here for those interested. I just have a few minutes to go, and I want to say thank you to everyone for listening and joining in. I'm very eager to continue having these conversations in parts of the world that Lumen hasn't been able to touch yet. And I have shared my email address with those that would like to engage more. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I would want to open for questions, but since I can't see or hear any of you, I just want to close by saying thank you so much. And I would love to be in person this year, but hopefully next time. Have a great rest of the conference, everyone.